Today we'll look at the next verse of the 37 Practices of Bodhisattvas, verse 20. So it reads, While the enemy of your own anger is unsubdued, though you conquer external foes, they will only increase. Therefore, with the militia of love and compassion, subdue your own mind. This is the practice of Bodhisattvas. So this verse is on anger, which is a really big topic, a huge topic. So much to be said about that. And it's also one of my favorite topics. I really like talking about it, teaching it, and partly because I've had so much experience with it. And everyone has their own experience, but much of my life I suppressed, repressed, and denied my anger because of various causes and conditions. But then at a certain point, I realized that doesn't work because I was good at, not acting it out, which is good from the point of view of other people, not hurting others. But it still comes out. It still kind of leaks out, in your facial expressions, your tone of voice, your body language. So people still pick up on it. And it doesn't work. It actually doesn't work to suppress it. It doesn't go away by itself. So I realized at some point that I had to acknowledge it and work on it. And then it became really interesting. I find it just a fascinating topic to look at and work on. And I realized, I think one of the reasons I was, I did suppress my anger was because I was afraid of it. And I think that's probably quite common. Many people may feel that way. I mean, it is scary in a way because it can be so destructive. If we don't know how to manage it, then, it leads to war and terrorism and murder and all kinds of horrible things. So it does have, a lot of potential for harm and suffering. But then I was thinking about, knowing the Buddhist teachings about the mind, the nature of the mind and so on, has been enormously helpful. Because I thought, why be afraid of anger? It's mind, right? It's the nature of anger is mind. And what is mind? We know it's clear and knowing, which means it's not physical, right? There's no physical properties, no physical characteristics of it. It's like air, it's not made of molecules or particles or anything that can do any harm or any damage, right? Does that make sense? It's not like it's got arms and legs and teeth and weapons and it can, be destructive. It's like nothing in the sense of, being non-physical, non-material. And then it's just awareness. It's just a kind of awareness. So thinking about that really helped me to overcome fear of anger and also the fact that it's impermanent. Knowing about the mind and how whatever exists in the mind comes and goes. It lasts only a moment, a fraction of a moment, and then it's gone. There may be a series of moments because we know we can be angry for, hours, days, but eventually it goes. And even within that period of time, if you watch your mind, you're probably not angry every single second. It probably comes and goes. Yeah. So if you observe the actual experience of anger, you can see that for yourself, that it's impermanent. So those two things I found really, really helpful for working with anger. And so when I do find anger coming up in my mind, which it still does, I still have a lot of it, this is what I try to do. I try to remind myself it's just a state of mind. It's not physical. It's not material. It can't really do any harm to me or anybody else. And it's also impermanent, like the clouds in the sky. It comes and goes. And if you wait long enough, it'll just go away. But of course, there's lots of other things you can do, methods. And I also find a really helpful method or antidote is to de-identify with it. This is true for every disturbing emotion, because we normally have the tendency to identify. It's just an automatic thing. It just happens automatically. As soon as some emotion comes up in the mind or I or whatever just automatically identifies with it, and it feels as if that's me. I am that. And when we do that, it increases the energy. It's almost like it puts fuel on the fire. It makes it bigger and stronger, and then it can last longer and be harder to get rid of. So what I try to do, if I'm mindful enough, is to, when I notice some disturbing emotion in the mind, to just say to myself, that is in my mind, rather than I am that. And just that alone is often very, very helpful. Just to name it and understand it's just a state of mind. It's just something in the mind rather than who I am. And I try to share this when I'm teaching. And one time I was teaching in a city center in Italy. And we were doing a weekend course on working with emotions. And I spoke about this method. And then we had a break. And during the break, one man had to go out and add parking coupons to his car. The system there is you buy parking coupons from a machine and put them in your car, and then the police won't give you a ticket. So he had to go and add more parking coupons. But he got there too late. The police had already come and he had a ticket. And when he came back, he said, when he saw the parking ticket on his car, the anger was coming up. And he just said to himself, anger is in my mind, anger is in my mind, anger is in my mind. And it really did help him to stay calm rather than exploding. And in that kind of situation, you might start punching, the car or people or yelling, screaming, whatever. So, it really does help. It does help to stay calm. And actually, just not long ago, I think just shortly after the retreat started, every morning after breakfast, I take a walk down the hill. And one morning, I just noticed I had this feeling like I wanted to kick the snow. There were all these piles of snow on the side of the road, and I just had this feeling like I wanted to kick the snow. I don't know why. I figured it's probably some kind of angry energy that wants to get out. But just noticing that, and then identifying it, acknowledging it, but also saying to myself, but I don't have to. Even though I feel that way, I don't have to do it. And then it went away. So sometimes just noticing what's happening in your mind, knowing it's just a state of mind, it's impermanent, it's transitory, it's not who you are, it's not going to be there forever, and that you do have a choice. You have a choice about what you want to do with that. I could have gone and kicked the snow. It wouldn't have hurt anybody. But I also realized I don't have to do that, and then it just went away by itself. So that's a really helpful method for working on anger or any other disturbing emotion. And there's tons of other methods, as you know. Venerable Shuddhan's book is quite well known, working with anger. And there's many other books as well. His Holiness's book, Healing Anger? Healing Anger. And I think there's one by Thich Nhat Hanh and one by Robert Thurman. Those are ones I've seen. And of course, Shantideva's chapter 6. And in this verse, verse 20, he recommends love and compassion, generating love and compassion. That could be a little hard. If you're already, furious, it may be hard to just switch to love. That's like 180 degrees, completely opposite. Feel love and compassion. You might need to do something else to cool down the anger first before you can develop love and compassion. On the other hand, a really useful method, if you're angry at another person, is to put yourself in their shoes, put yourself in their position. Just try to understand, I'm sure that's part of the nonviolent communication method that you use here. Just trying to understand the other person, how they feel, where they're coming from. And that's a very helpful way of switching your mind from anger to compassion, to understanding. But we also need to remember to have love and compassion for ourselves. That needs to be said in the West, because Tibetans and other people in Asia don't seem to have much trouble with self-hatred, self-criticalness, but many people here in the West do. So if you do have that tendency, it's important to make sure that when you cultivate love and compassion, it's not just for everybody else, leaving yourself out, but it's also for oneself. That's a mistaken state of mind. And if you think about the Buddhas who have perfect wisdom, perfect everything in their minds, when they're looking at us, how do they feel? Are they hateful and judging the way we are to ourselves? No, they don't feel that way towards anybody. So what they have in their minds looking at us is nothing but pure, unconditional love and compassion constantly, no matter what we do, no matter how bad we are. They have nothing but love and compassion. So contemplating that, it can be very helpful to try to change that attitude in yourself and be more kind and caring. And yeah, just one last thing. With regard to working on anger and other disturbing emotions, there seem to be two kind of approaches. One is the warrior approach, that the disturbing emotions, this is like in Shantideva's Guide to the Bodhisattva's Way of Life, he compares disturbing emotions to the enemy, and that we need to battle our disturbing emotions. And he uses sort of very warlike language and images and so on. And for a long time, I was very happy. I was very comfortable with that approach. But then I came across another approach, which is almost the opposite, which is being very kind and gentle. For example, I just heard this secondhand. I didn't hear it directly or read it, but apparently Thich Nhat Hanh says, you know, when you have anger, hold your anger in your arms like a crying child, something like that. Okay, it's totally opposite approach. And I find that really helpful sometimes. Have you heard that approach? Yeah. Sometimes that can be really helpful because again, we tend to have this problem of identifying with our disturbing emotions. So if we're identifying with our anger and then we're battling our anger, we might be inadvertently battling ourself, beating ourself up. And I know I do that a lot. So that's counterproductive. So sometimes it's really helpful to just, have a loving approach towards the anger and try to understand what's going on. Like a crying child. If a child is crying, you don't yell at the child and say, shut up, get out of here. You try to understand why the child is crying and then deal with it in that way. Try to find words that will soothe and comfort the child. So in a similar way, sometimes there's a reason for the anger. So there's something else under the anger. It could be hurt. It could be a feeling of abandonment or neglect. It could be fear. There's other things underneath the anger. So by using that approach, sometimes you discover something else that's underneath the anger. And if you work with that, that can be really, really powerful, really effective. So I just wanted to mention that there are these two approaches, and you could try them both out and see which works best for you. And you could alternate it as well. Sometimes one approach might be more effective, sometimes the other. But I personally have found both approaches helpful at different times. Okay, thank you.